So for our next section of the program, we'll examine how agriculture can respond to the marketplace trends and consumer demands that are refining the food industry. We'll begin with Mark Retzloff, co-founder of Horizon Organic Dairy, Aurora Organic Dairy, and Alfalfa's Markets. Mr. Retzloff is a pioneer in organic and natural foods industry with a 48-year career starting, managing and advertising and advising successful companies. He is co-founder and chairman of Alfalfa's Markets, Boulder-based natural food stores. He also co-founded Aurora Organic Dairy in 2003 and currently acts as a senior advisor to the company. Mr. Retzloff started his career in natural foods retail as co-founder of Eden Foods, Rainbow Grocery, and the original Alfalfa's Market, which merged with Wild Oats Market in 1996. In 1990, Mr. Retzloff was chairman of the Organic Food Alliance, which was instrumental in passing the 1990 Organic Food Production Act in D.C. Mr. Retzloff went on to become one of the co-founders of Horizon Organic Dairy, serving as chairman, CEO, and president international. He then became chairman of Rudy's Organic Bakery, where he helped execute a successful turnaround of the company. Mr. Retzloff lives outside Boulder, Colorado, on a farm with his wife, Terry, where they raise their 3 children. In his free time, he enjoys gardening, golf, and visiting his home in Hanalei, Kauai, Hawaii. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Retzloff. And also walking up with him is Miss Kristen Schmidt, who is a native of Greeley, Colorado. She is a senior studying agricultural business and animal sciences here at Colorado State. She is one of CSU's College of Agricultural Sciences Ag Ambassadors and served as both a Colorado State FFA officer and a Central Region Vice President for the National FFA organization, formerly known as Future Farmers of America. She loves to witness growth in the lives of those around her and intends to leverage that passion to help advance in the agricultural industry. Schmidt hopes to equip people of all ages with the tools they need to learn in their strengths and maximize their potential. Please help me in welcoming Kristen Schmidt.
What do you think about that introduction?
Well, I thought it was fair.
It's always interesting to see what other folks say about you, right? But I also think it's important for you to tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and kind of what your experiences are in agriculture.
Okay. Well, I have to go back about 48 years. I was a student at the University of Michigan in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment. And I had begun changing my diet with my 2 college roommates, and we had become macrobiotic. And we couldn't find any of the products that we needed for that diet. So, being young and enthusiastic and full of energy, we decided to start the first natural food store in Ann Arbor, Michigan. That was Eden Foods. My job was to go out and talk to the farmers to bring in wheat that we could grind into flour and beans and other products. But through my learnings at the school of SNRE, I realized that the agricultural industry was one of the largest points of pollution in our country when you include water runoff and with soil erosion, what we were spraying in the air, and so on and so forth. So I was going out to talk to this particular farm. I remember his name, Tom Vreeland. I was sitting at his kitchen table with him and talking to him about his ability to grow hard red winter wheat and soft white wheat for us, for pastry flour. And he said, well, this farm has been in my family for 5 generations. And I'm growing it the way you want to, the same way that my grandfather and my great-grandfather were growing things on this farm. I said, well, that's great. And he said, but for me to do what you want to do, it's going to probably cost me a little bit more. And I said, fine, we could pay you more. And that was a huge lesson for me. that for me to be successful in what I wanted to do, my job, I wasn't a farmer, was to produce a market for the products so that farmers would grow those things. And so I've spent my career basically in promoting and selling organic and natural foods throughout the United States. And that is kind of how I got into this whole thing, and that's how I got involved with agriculture. Mostly was at retail initially, but in 1989, when I was running Alfalfa's markets, there had been an alar scare with apples in the western United States, and alar was a pesticide that was being used. And I had all these customers coming into me and asking me if we could ever get organic dairy products. And dairy was about 10% of our sales at that time, and there wasn't any available in the United States at that point. So I got together with a friend of mine, a medium to large-scale dairy farmer here in Colorado, and asked Mark Pepperzak, was his name, if he would help me put together a feasibility study to see if we could do organic. Now at that time, there was 27 different states that had certification programs. The consumers were confused about which one meant this. It was affecting trade between states, being able to take a product in from California and say it was organic if you had different standards here in Colorado. So I said, well, listen, let's see if you can actually produce it. And I gave him some thoughts what I thought organic dairy farming would be. And we did that study. We said, yeah, we can do it with the dairy and with the animals and with the feed that we need. But we're not sure about the consumer demand. So that was right at the time when the organic industry was very, very small. And we were attempting to take those 27 different certification programs and consolidate them into a national program. And I had been at Alfalfa's for 11 years, and I decided at that time to help out with getting the law passed. So I became the head lobbyist for the organic industry in Washington, D.C., and got the Organic Food Production Act passed in 1990. And at that time, I met a fellow from Wisconsin who had 3 dairy farmers who were producing organic milk, small dairy farmers, probably 40 to 50 cows. And he was taking the milk, separating it, taking the butter or cream, and selling it to somebody who was making ghee, which is clarified butter. And he was taking the skim portion of the milk and just selling it off into the conventional milk market. So I asked him if we could buy the skim milk. He said, sure. And that was the start of Horizon Organic Dairy. We started as a yogurt company. Quickly, the demand for milk besides yogurt appeared. And right at the same year that we started, the USDA approved the use of bovine growth hormone, BGH or BST. And we began fielding calls from all over the United States for if we could supply hormone-free, BGH-free milk. And we said, yes, we can get organic, which won't have that in it, but we're going to have to go back to our farm base and see if we can get more milk being produced for us, which we did. And so we entered into a 7-year period where our sales went up a compound annual growth rate of about 125% a year or greater. And that was the beginning of Horizon Organic Milk. So that kind of transformed me away from retail into manufacturing. And I've been doing that ever since. So that's kind of my background into the agricultural area.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing with us a little bit of perspective on kind of where you come from and your approach to this concept of innovation, sustainability, and talent. In agriculture, we often find ourselves talking about a lot of finite resources. We have X amount of water and this many acres of arable land, but there's some infinite resources that I think we need to talk about today as well, and that's what I'm excited to unpack with you in our next couple minutes together. The infinite potential of innovation in agriculture, the infinite potential of the minds of the people that gather at land-grant universities and at summits like this across the country, right? And the talents and the gifts that they bring individually into our industry, and how we can leverage those in a way that moves us forward and keeps us innovating and growing and advancing in a way that's sustainable for the future. An innovation that you're particularly familiar with is kind of innovative marketing in differentiated markets and finding a place for a product that other folks thought maybe didn't have a place. I often find myself being sucked into a false mindset, maybe, that those differentiated projects are small, but your experiences prove that they are very large. Tell us about how you thought big in that product differentiation to make Aurora Organic Dairy and Horizon become, global industries, as opposed to just kind of these cottage markets that we might commonly refer to them as.
Well, first of all, being in innovation, you have to take advantage of what opportunities you notice are out there in the marketplace. Yeah. So I think that's first. I've always found that the key to that is listening to the customer, understanding what the demand is, understanding the marketplace, and understanding how you can meet that demand. So I think that that's really the first part of being in innovation, understanding that. I think I've been very fortunate in my career that the industry that I've been involved in is continuing to grow much faster than the rate of population. The organics industry is continuing to grow at mid-teens or greater every year, whereas the food industry grows as our population grows. You just can't, put more food into people than they're going to take at that point. So I've been involved in the growth part of that industry. I think for me, it was always not how large or how big scale it is, it's how you make it large, is really the way I've looked at it. So that meant that particularly when we were dealing in the agricultural aspect of the food, the growing of it, that we had to understand how to take the principles and the methodologies that were required in organic and take it to a larger scale. So, for example, let's take health care of dairy cows. Okay, we couldn't use antibiotics, or we'd have to remove the cows from the herd for a year. So how did we do that? Well, we began looking at probiotics. We began realizing that early recognition of problems with cows was extremely important. That if we, instead of having, what we did with our herdsmen was not just move animals around, but we told our herdsmen that they needed to be watching the cows. Any kind of difference in movement, not getting up quickly, how they were walking, their characteristics of their nose, their eyes, their tongue. We were milking them twice or 3 times a day, depending on what's going on with their udders and their teats and so on and so forth. If we could recognize that a cow was off earlier, even 1 or 2 days, we could use other types of therapies rather than antibiotics to treat them. So that was one thing that we began doing, and we began measuring the fact that, because when we gave them antibiotics, we basically would have to sell that cow because we couldn't be feeding it for a year and not getting any productivity off of it. So, and that was expensive for us to do. So we learned how to take care of those animals. We found that putting them in the least amount of stress was better for their health, just like for any of us. If we're not stressed, our health is usually better. So we did the same thing with cows. That meant how we bed them, how we took care of them during the day, how we moved them, how we put them through the reproductive stage of their life, how we treated them as we raised all of our own heifers up into cows, so how we took care of them during that whole phase. So we had to change all those systems in a way to make it so that it could be, those animals would be healthy and that we weren't going to have to use the antibiotics. So that's how we were able to, we had to do that to scale up to meet the demand that we had out there. And we've done that with all sorts of other things. When I was at Rudy's, for example, we had the opportunity to become a national brand in bread. Well, how were we going to ship bread to the East Coast or the West Coast from Boulder, Colorado? Well, we decided that we would freeze it as soon as it was, right after it got down to about 70 or 80 degrees. We would freeze it, and that would suspend the staling until it thawed. Okay, now we thought that was new, but we found out that that's what most of the big bread companies were doing. But that allowed us to then, increase our production and ship bread to New York, which was a coveted market for us. And that, led to us becoming the leading organic bread company in the United States. So those are, just looking at those things, they don't sound like they're very, complex, but they're very important to be able to do, and that's how it leads you to get to the scale to be able to take things out to deeper into the market.
Yeah. Let's zoom a little bit more on some of those little things that maybe happened in the organizations and the companies that you've been involved in. What pieces and parts of the buzzword culture, right, that we see a lot in business have driven the external success? So kind of that internal function driving external success in the organizations you've been a part of.
I'm a big believer in values and beliefs in organizations. And that's what drives what your mission and purpose is as an organization. So for me, those are important to establish right at the very beginning, to make sure that you embed those into your organization in all the things that you do, whether it's in your employee manual, whether it's, well, basically for me, as usually the leader in these organizations, it was about walking my talk. If I'm putting those things and saying this is what it's all about, I have to be leading my life that way. So that's, I think, is extremely important in doing that. That leads to kind of organizations where people understand that that when you walk your talk, it means it's your tendency to be more caring, to be more kind, to be more listening to what's going on with your people in your organization. And so that's just basic, things that I've used in just establishing the culture. Today, we see a lot of change what's going on in the big CPGs, the big consumer product goods companies in the United States in the food industry. Most of them are, their sales are flat. They're losing share to a number of these young companies and innovative companies that are coming forward. And they're having a real trouble with innovation because it's not part of their culture to do that. And so there are a few exceptions to that. For example, Denise Morrison, who is has been the CEO of Campbell's for the last 3 years, realized that was going on with her organization when she was brought in to be the CEO, and that she was going to have to make changes. And so what she realized, it was the culture in her organization, that she had to change the values and the beliefs, the mission and purpose of the organization. And she also found that there was a lot of people, particularly in key roles, who had been there for decades and weren't capable of adapting to the changes that she was bringing about. So she did the thing that a smart CEO should do, is that she outplaced those folks and brought in younger and ones who resonated with the values and beliefs of Campbell's. At the same time, she went out and acquired Bolthouse and Plum Organics and other companies, small ones that were doing innovative stuff, bolted those onto what they were doing there at Campbell. And today Campbell is pulling itself out of that, the rut that these big CPG companies are in, and they're becoming more profitable, their sales are increasing, and she's doing the right stuff.
You mentioned values and beliefs, and I'd like to dig into that maybe even a little bit more personally, if that's okay with you. I know you're involved with an organization called Palm Does Right. Palm Done Right, I apologize. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you came into that organization and how that aligns with what you believe?
Okay. So you're getting me to tell stories is what you're doing, right? Okay. So about 7 years ago, I was at a convention I guess it's a convention, in Boulder called LOHAS, Lifestyles of the Healthy and Sustainable. And a friend of mine a Dutchman who had a magazine called The Intelligent Optimist, it was called Ode, but the tagline was Intelligent Optimist. And basically he had a concept of just only reporting on good news, so that you could get up in the morning and read his byline on the web, and it was only good stuff. Okay. So he came to me and he said, listen, I'd like to introduce you to this gentleman. So I chatted with him, and he told me that his wife's family was from Ecuador, and that her family had a palm plantation in Ecuador, and he wanted to know what to do with it. He was a very successful businessman. And I said, well, I don't really know much about palm. I know it's a commodity, and I know that I've been successful by differentiating commodities with milk and bread and so on. And that he needed to do that. I suggested that he look at producing the palm organically, getting it certified to be fair trade, fair labor, working with the farmers in collectives and cooperatives and produce a collection model. So he said, okay. He called me up 6 months later and said, hey, can I get together? And I said, fine, I'll be in Amsterdam. He was from Rotterdam. And we got together, and he'd done everything that I told him to do, and I gave him a few more things that I thought would be critical. And lo and behold, 6 months later, he called me and got those done. And so I realized that this guy gets stuff done. Okay, he's got the GSD gene. And so I began following what he was doing. I went down to Ecuador and realized that, and I learned a lot about palm. Palm is the number one edible oil in the world. 85% of it is produced in Malaysia and Indonesia. And I didn't want to ask Juan about this because that's where the conflict palm oil is, and one of the companies of ADM is Wilmer, which is selling all this conflict palm oil. But that's where there is, quickly on conflict palm oil, that's where the rainforests are being cut and burned. That's where the habitat for orangutans and tigers and rhinoceroses are being destroyed. Child labor, indentured labor, so on and so forth. We call that conflict palm. So Palm Done Right was established to do it the right way. So we are now certified organic. We're part of the Roundtable for Sustainable Production of Palm Oil. We are certified by Rainforest Alliance, by Greenpeace, you name it. We're certified by that. We're practicing regenerative agriculture as well. We currently have almost 200 farmers in Ecuador. We do our own extraction down there. And we also have a project in Ghana with 600 farmers, and another project in Sierra Leone with 1,650 farmers. Smallholders that we work with, we're bringing that palm oil in, and we're selling it as ingredient both in North America and Europe. We're the leading organic and sustainable palm oil company. We're growing so rapidly, we're basically sold out for the next 12 months, and we're rapidly trying to add on more farmers and more projects to produce palm oil. Palm oil, by the way, is the most sustainable of all vegetable oils. It produces 7 times as much oil as other plant-based oils. The plants produce for 35 years. They The farmers collect the fruit from them year-round. You can grow things in the understory underneath them. So, you know, from that standpoint, from those sustainability points, it's the most sustainable. But we were just, you know, the key to that one is that we had to, there's been so much negative conversation about palm oil. We had to change that to be able to sell that product. So what we've done is that we've started a movement called Palm Done Right, okay, where we list all the things that we do against how typically palm is grown. We've worked with the people that we sell products to. For example, we sell to Dr. Bronner's all of the palm oil that they use in their products, and then they put the label Palm Done Right on it. Nutiva is another organization we work with. We've also discovered that palm oil is an essential ingredient in a product called Megalac, which is a rumen bypass fat for dairy cows. And what it does is it increases the productivity in the gut and the rumens in the stomach and the digestion of the food, and you get the same amount of production with less food. So, and the other key thing for that is that it does that by more efficiently digesting, which means less enteric fermentation, which means less greenhouse gas from farting and belching that comes out as methane. So in that way, it's actually a product that's better for the greenhouse gas. The farmer's getting more production with less feed. So that product we introduced last spring, and that one sold out for the next 12 months, and we're rapidly trying to find additional ways to produce more of that. So that's, you know, taking a product. That was an innovation that just kind of fell on our lap, partly because I was involved in the dairy industry. I understood that. We could, you know, we never were able to find something. So those are some of the things that we've done with that.
When I look at that from kind of a 30,000-foot view, it seems like you approached an engine and just kind of changed the firing order of those pistons. So that system might have worked for someone, but you know it's not working for everyone. And by changing the order, that those pieces and parts are moving, or by adjusting some of those even small things, you're able to capture a market and capture an entire group of folks that we weren't reaching before. I know you have the Get Stuff Done gene as well, and maybe this is a little bit of proprietary information, but what's the next system that you think desperately needs optimization, either domestically or abroad?
Well, I think it's part of it is how we deliver food to people. It's something that is changing rapidly throughout, particularly in our company, but I mean country, but around the world. It's the e-commerce, and you know we've all seen a huge example of that with Amazon acquiring Whole Foods, and that's fundamentally changing the way food is going to be brought to people. It means and that's kind of, to me, I feel good about it in many ways because I see that some things, lots of types of food that aren't available in communities and places where people shop are now going to be available to them through e-commerce. So from that standpoint, I think it's great. I'm a little concerned about the bricks and mortars that are out there in the retail environment because I'm really concerned about what's happening with community in our world, particularly in this country. And I think it was brought up by a number of the other speakers today. But shopping in markets or even at farmers markets and so on are one of the only ways where we have community anymore in our world today. Neighborhoods are changing. They were much, you know, when I grew up, we had block parties in the neighborhoods. You knew everybody, and you all went to school with them and so on. That's not the case any longer, okay? And coffee shops, when I grew up, or when I was going to college, that's where we decided where we were going to protest next or where we were going to go do this or whatever. Today, nobody talks to anybody. They sit there in front of their smart device, their computer, their phone, so we don't get community. And for me, where we purchase the food, where we go to interact with other people, is in markets. And so I'm somewhat concerned about that aspect of it. So I think we're going to see in the retail a shrinking of the middle of the store, which is where all the hard goods are and so on. The perimeter where the fresh foods are, we're going to continue to see that thrive in there. And there's one important aspect of the retail environment, and besides, it's all about convenience and quality and value, but the fourth component is service. And service is really based on that human interaction that we can have with one another. And so, to me, we lose that in the e-commerce. The service, as it gets there fast, that may be more convenience than anything. But we don't have that interaction, and I really feel that that's important. It's certainly out there. I want to use that as kind of a pivot here. About 12 years ago, and speaking of community in the food and area, we started an organization down in Boulder called Naturally Boulder, which was, I don't know what it was. It was just a gathering of people who were in the organic and natural food industry. Well, today, that organization now has over 1,200 members, has 258 sponsoring companies. It has, and it's just this is all in Colorado, so all of Colorado. We have morning mingles, which is really networking. Once a month, we have evening get-togethers for networking once a month. We have education programs. We have 2 large programs we do where we bring that whole group together. And it's establishing this community where people are sharing, they're collaborating with one another, they're talking about things. The innovation that's coming out of that is really fantastic. That's why we're getting all these new companies and so forth. So, I think that we can do things to create that kind of community, and that community is, I think, critical for the kind of innovation that we want to see in the food industry. People help one another, they take care of each other, and so, I feel really good about that. I mean, I see something that's very positive in the works here.
I think even over just the last 30 minutes, it's easy to see what you value and kind of what you're passionate about. I'm interested in how you transfer those skills to the next generation. So we start thinking about this talent bucket. There's a lot of young people, a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Z and Gen Yers that need to have that transfer of knowledge and skill. What are some ways that you use the things you're passionate about to elevate the lives of young people and that next generation?
I knew you were going to ask me that question.
I know.
Okay. So I have a slide here. I don't know if you can get this slide up on here. Okay. So these are kind of my keys to success. We talked about walking your talk, having your vision, your dream, and being authentic in what you're doing. Treating others as you want to be treated is something that I learned very early on with my family at home, and being the oldest of 4 kids. I was strongly suggested by my mother that I had to be the role model. So I listened, okay, which was second. The third one here, listening to customers. This is really important, understanding the demand and the marketplace. The food industry is just learning how to do that. And I also think this is important for ag because we're going through so many fundamental changes, what's going on with ag, but it's really in response to what the consumer out there is asking for. And the retailers then go to the manufacturers who have to go to the suppliers of the ingredients and ask them. So truly, this is consumer activated on this, and the retailers are kind of the gatekeepers to those consumers. Gross margin, I don't know. I mean, to me, gross margin is critical in every business. It's how you pay your employees, how you pay your rent, how you pay your vendors. I mean, without a gross margin, and so many businesses fail because they don't understand. You have to make a sufficient gross margin. Staying focused and being a finisher. We get distracted so often. So many young entrepreneurs I work with, they're just getting to the point with a certain product and they say, well, I'm going to go add this to my product line, or I'm going to do this. And pretty soon they've been distracted from the thing that's just driving their business. For us at Horizon, it was always milk was driving our business. But we would never get distracted from milk, even when we were coming up with new yogurt flavors or sour cream or cream cheese or cottage cheese. We always made sure that the milk business was as strong as it could be. Knowing who you are and don't believe your press clippings, okay? I think that's critical for us. And then pick them right, build your team with high performers. And I have another slide because people always ask me, okay, what do you mean by high performers? So can we get this next slide up here? Okay. This is something I put together over the years, and these are my top 10 attributes of high performers. Being ambitious, highly motivated, sense of urgency, a go-getter. That's critical for high performers. They're winners, whether they did something in athletics, whether they were on their debate team, whether they had to, whatever they did, winning awards, we find that high performers typically in some kind of competition were winners. They're sociable, they relate to people, they build relationships, they get along with others, they collaborate, they're good listeners, we talked about that earlier. They're hard workers, they work long hours, they're very persistent in what they do. Here at the university, we see a lot of people who fit into this type of breed stock. Because they're here and they're doing this kind of work. Having a vision, being a dreamer, and a sense of purpose, hopefully you probably realize that I was dreaming a lot about what the future could be and hoping that it would be there. You've got to be able to close a deal. And that means you have to be persuasive, you have to be able to get your thoughts in order and be able to convey them in an appropriate manner. Loyal, being dedicated, go the extra yard. This to me is extremely important with people. Having a high self-esteem, being confident, and finally, being a risk taker. Being able to, willing to put it all on online to make something work. Sometimes, I would be working, earlier in my career, 7 days a week. 12 hours a day, and still trying to have a family life. So I was all in at that time. So anyway, that's kind of what I think about what high performers are. I try to, particularly in key positions, to always look for that type of performer. I have questions that I've developed over the year that I can ask, which helps me quickly understand if somebody fits into that category.
Thank you for sharing that wisdom with us and just for sharing your perspective on all of those kind of topics that we've bounced around. I know from previous sessions that this is a pretty engaged audience, and so I'd like to flip that focus outward and gather some questions from you all.
Is organic agriculture the most sustainable approach to provide human nutrition? Why or why not?
Well then, let me see. I have to say yes, but I'm going to qualify that because I would qualify it by what we mean by sustainability and what we mean by human nutrition. Okay, so I think we heard from the last speaker that there is ways that you can take the nutritional components, bifurcate them, separate, and then put them back together in products. Okay. But I also know that if we eat a healthy diet from foods that are grown appropriately and delivered in good condition to people and put together well, that can provide the proper nutrition as well. In fact, up until 50 years ago, all through all the millennia going back, we were using food, and we've existed as a species on the planet Earth by doing just that. So I think organic asks us to look at the whole food that we're producing and making sure that we're not doing things that can take away from the nutritional value.
Thank you. If you were to pursue a new venture that is direct to consumer sales, for example, not retail, what different steps would you implement in today's market?
This is direct to consumer?
Yes.
One of the companies that I'm really intrigued with, it's a Boulder-based company called Organic Chef. And it's a meal kit delivery program similar to Blue Apron, if you know what Blue Apron is. But it's all done with organic ingredients. And this company is growing at a rocket ship pace. It's gone from 0 to $100 million in the last year and a half. And it's continuing to grow, and they are adding paleo or other types of food into it. I see that as because that helps lots of people who have very busy lives and lifestyles and be able to do it. It also gets them into preparing food, but actually takes away the mystery of how you can put it together because it comes with recipes. So I like that idea a lot in getting that out to people. I think, hey, I like e-commerce, even though I don't engage in it very much, because many of the businesses I'm involved in have a significant portion of what they're selling through Amazon and through e-commerce. One of the companies I'm on the board of is called Traditional Medicinals. It's the largest medicinal tea company in the United States. And our mother's milk tea, which helps in lactation, is the #1 selling tea of any type on Amazon. And I love it because, women, mothers at that time, their lives have changed. They're vulnerable, and if you provide them with a product that helps in a condition that they have, it's something that begins for them to become loyal to that brand. And so, since we've been selling that mother's milk tea and our other teas on Amazon, we've gone from 50,000 likes 3 years ago to over 2 million likes on our website, okay? And it's based on us getting out into that world of commerce, e-commerce out there. And so I think that's very positive out there and that type of thing.
How has organic dairy production changed the way in which the people perceive milk production?
Well, that's a really good question because there was times when there are still a lot of people who don't understand where milk comes from. Now, I'm speaking to an informed crowd here, but it doesn't come from a bottle or a carton, okay? It comes from a cow, okay? So that's the first thing that they have to learn, okay? But, not being facetious on this thing, I think it's really, it's talked about caring for the animal in different ways. It's talked about, this image that the cows are always out on pasture all the time. Well, we know, living here in Colorado, that if they're out on pasture for 6 months or 7 months of the year, there's nothing out there for them to eat on that pasture. Nothing's growing. So you have to feed them otherwise. And so, so when they think it's pasture-based, well, it's not really pasture-based because we're producing the hay on our fields out here, which we're baling, or we're producing corn, which we're chopping and putting into silage, okay? And that's what we're feeding the cows during the season when there's no grass growing. But, okay, people realize that, they want to have those animals out on pasture. They don't want to have them, locked up in pens where they don't have free access and so on and so forth. So I think that's a very positive thing. For me, I've seen that I've been to many dairy farms in my career that were not selling product to us, but I wouldn't buy from them because I didn't think that the farms were being handled and managed appropriately. So I think that's helping us as far as if I was a cow, I'd think it's great, okay, that people are more sensitive to how I should be taken care of on that.
Grab one more question, William.
How do you encourage a culture of innovation?
Me personally, I spend an awful lot of time with young companies. I don't have a real job. I do coaching, mentoring, consulting, guiding, that type of work. I work with a number of young companies. I sit on a number of boards. I sit on university boards, 2 at Michigan. I'm the chairman of the Center for Sustainable Systems. I sit on the School for the Environment and Sustainability. I'm the co-chair of a new program at the University of Colorado, the Masters in the Environment. I'm working here with AJ at the School of Agriculture here. That's my way of working and trying to help facilitate innovation. So.
To kind of wrap up this whole conversation, I think there's a nice question actually over on the Converse sketchboards that we see over there. Tell us a little bit about your ideal innovation and agricultural ecosystem. What's the big takeaway from this whole conversation? Boil it down for us and give us that picture.
I think we have some voids in our ecosystem here. One of the big voids I know of is having somebody, the small local farmer, having some way for that individual or that farmer to get their products to market. And so that somebody picking it up, somebody being that distribution arm that takes that produce or that other products, takes it to the people who, not to the big distributor who then does all this stuff and then loads it on a big truck and then drops it off. But I know when we were started with milk, we were fortunate enough that Robinson Dairy here in Colorado got hooked up with all the coffee bars. Well, now Robinson Dairy sells more milk that goes into coffee bars than they sell into retail stores. So we were able to be involved in that. But we need that distribution system for all these younger companies. We also need retailers who are willing to take a risk with a young company. At Alfalfa's, we always let a young company, particularly Front Range or Colorado companies, we give them a month. We put them on the shelf, we put them into a end aisle, and basically the concept is if it doesn't sell in Boulder, it isn't going to sell anywhere, okay? So we give them a shot, and if it sells here, then they can take that back to the distributor and say we got it, it's selling in Alfalfa's, and they feel good, and they typically will get their product into distribution. So that's one of the things that I do on that.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time to share with us kind of your thoughts on innovation, sustainability, and talent in agriculture. I think it was a great discussion driven from audience questions as well as just from your experiences. And we really appreciate you taking the time out to do that with us. Malia actually has a beautiful ram's head statue for you. And Dean Minnan has personally inscribed that. I think the title that he selected is very fitting. It could have been anything from CEO, president, coach, mentor, father, husband, but he chose innovator and pioneer. And we really appreciate your innovations and pioneers in the industry and are so grateful for your contributions to sustainable agriculture. Thank you so much, Mr. Retzloff.
Okay.